Chappelle. Welcome back to it. Welcome back to the start of your next theme we're talking about, right? Some of you are like, isn't it a new unit? Well, look, we're getting into that whole thing here in a hot second, right? But the big thing about it that we talked about today in class, all right, we just had a great indoor week. Y'all had a great job, did a great job at that assembly today and stuff like that. But we're now recording this thing going into our last week of the quarter, right? Going into our last week of the quarter and heading up on our exams. It's just going to be a really intense time, but y'all are going to do great. I have full confidence in all of you. B period, C period, F period, you're all going to crush this exam. And then we're all going to go majestically into the sunset together until next quarter starts. But the big thing about it, though, is we just started talking about, like, this big chunk of the unit is known as medieval Europe, right? But the thing about it is before we talk about medieval Europe, we have to talk about what's going on in the eastern half of Rome, right, which is known as the Byzantine Empire at the time, right? There's this little capital city, Constantinople. We have to talk about what was going on in eastern Rome. Then we also have to talk about what was going on in the eastern kingdoms, right? We have to talk about what's going on in other parts of the world. So we don't have to actually sit there and just worry about Europe and what's happening in Europe. We're going to give it a bigger perspective on what's also going on in other parts of the world as well, because it's very, very important to not be a Eurocentric historian, okay? So getting into it, though, we're now going to first talk about the Byzantine Empire, right? So let's go ahead and jump head first into where we left off about the Byzantine Empire. We were discussing, oh, dang, look at this. Like, this is like just me holding my sword right there. That's a good statue moment right there. Now, looking at it, though, in general, okay, you have to understand the Byzantine Empire is going to be started by none other than that guy we finished up talking about in class, right? We talked about Constantine, right? The same dude that legalized Christianity is going to be the guy that starts a new empire on the eastern side of Rome. He actually started this thing called a dual capital system, where Rome would have two different cities that they could rule from at any given moment should they need it. And the first one was, of course, Rome. Old Rome. The Rome that was over in Italy, right? But then he creates a new city and he wants to have a new Rome. And so he found, oh man, that one snuck up on me, I apologize. So he founded a new Rome and he called it Nova Roma. And I know we talked about this in my C period class, a little bit in my yard. Oh man, sorry. Hot lunch today. Woof. All right, so now look, going into it, Nova Roma is going to be the new city that Constantine founds, right? Well, the thing about it is that is what we refer to as now the eastern half of Rome. The Byzantine Empire is the eastern half of the Roman Empire. So when we talked about that split by Theodosius and down the middle, and then there's going to be a western half and an eastern half, the eastern half will later be called the Byzantine Empire. Now, some of you are like, but Mr. Terry, Byzantine Empire, that sounds ridiculous. Well, the reason why it's called the Byzantine Empire is because the city that Constantine founded, that he called Nova Roma, used to be an older Roman city called Byzantium, right? So the thing about it is this city that we're talking about right now is going to go through a multitude of different name changes. So it's important to know that. It was originally called Byzantium. And then Constantine founded another city on top of it. It was called Nova Roma. But then after Constantine dies, it will be renamed Constantinople after Constantine himself, right? So the thing about it going into it, though, that's also important to know, is we are going to be talking about the Middle Ages, right? And in the Middle Ages, a lot of people think about things like this. Exactly. Very dingy, very gross, sometimes referred to as a dark age and stuff like that. But as you can tell, very muddy. There was disease and stuff like that spreading around Western Europe. But that's the old half of Rome. That's the western half of Rome. We're talking about the eastern half of Rome that looked more like this, right? The eastern half of Rome, or the Byzantine Empire, looks a lot like the old Rome, right? Looks very, very Roman, looks very, very intense, looks very, very like over the top. They even had a massive sporting arena that had Egyptian obelisks inside of it, and they called it the Hippodrome, right? And the Hippodrome was a very, very important landmark going forward that we'll even talk about further. But the thing about it is that while Western Rome, former Western Rome, is reorganizing and creating itself into a new era, new continent, right? The eastern half of Rome is doing just fine, right? The Byzantine is doing just fine. But wait a hot second. Did they themselves call it the Byzantine? Like when this majestic city, known as Constantinople by this point, was moving forward, saving the old relics of Rome, being amazing and beautiful and being absolutely awesome, while the western half of Rome is just looking a little bit more dingy and muddy. Really quickly, though, Did they call it the Byzantine? Like, why would they call it the Byzantine? That doesn't make any sense. Well, that's the whole thing about it. You have to understand is that the Byzantine Empire, they didn't call themselves the Byzantine. If you walked up to somebody who lived in Constantinople during this 1,000-year time period and you said, "Where are you from?" They would just say Rome, right? Even though they spoke Greek, they would just say, "Oh, Rome. We're the eastern half of Rome." So it's like, we're Roman. We are Roman, right? Well, the thing about it is, though, is then why do we call it the Byzantine now? Well, it's mainly just because when the Renaissance starts a little bit later on, some thinkers are going to come along and they want to kind of delineate the difference between the old Western Rome that went through the Middle Ages and then the Byzantine Empire, right? So they called it the Byzantine. And they didn't want to call it Rome because they didn't want to look bad, right? Makes you look kind of bad if Rome falls and then you enter into like a 1,000-year-long period of pretty rough experiences in a reorganizational period where plagues and wars and stuff like that will define you, right? Now, going into it, though, the Byzantine is going to grow super strong, super fast, all right? But why did they grow so strong, so fast? Well, mostly, a lot of it's due to geography, right? So particularly, first and foremost, their city, their capital city, Constantinople, was protected by water around the edges and then also a massive wall. This right here was the city of Constantinople, right? Now, the whole Byzantine wasn't protected by water on three sides. That would be ridiculous because it's a really big fluctuating size empire. But their capital city was actually like cordoned off by different waterways on all sides, making them a very important trade hub that we'll talk about here in a second. And there was a massive wall that went around the edge of the city that kept it very, very safe for a very long time. Christianity is also their official religion, and it will bind them together with a common cause. No more of this stuff that was going on in Western Rome when there were several religions running around, and the religion of the barbarians, and the religion of the Christians, and the religion of the Roman polytheists, and stuff like that. No longer is that happening. There's one binding church that is keeping the Byzantine sealed together, right? And going on it as well, they have a very strong military that kept the Byzantine Empire super protected. And of course, what former very strong military was this thing designed based off of? None other than the Roman military, right? And as we talked about when we talked about ancient Rome, their military was super intense. Catapults, tortoise formations, all these really big iron weapons, pylons, and but also, going into it also, the Byzantines also very, very wealthy. All right, we got all this green right here on this trading hub because they're making mad cash, right? You have to understand the Byzantine is going to be wildly wealthy because they are at a smack dab point right towards the middle of a very old school trade route, right? So if this is the eastern hemisphere of the globe, right, and we know that looking at it, that the city of Constantinople is right about there, right? So like it's located right there. It is between what is known as the old former Western Roman Empire and the rest of the world, right? Well, the thing about it is the rest of the world, which was doing very good after the fall of Rome. They were making lots of money and going through a golden age. There are certain products coming from all these different areas, right? So, for example, coming out of China was silk. Coming out of India was spices and teas. Coming out of the Arabic kingdoms are other very important products as well, like porcelains and other. Well, porcelains also come from China. But so what's going down there is mahogany and ebony woods are coming out of the west coast or the east coast of Africa, and all of these things would be traded along this really long route that I know that Sophia actually knows in my F period class. Sophia actually said this earlier. She was like, "Oh, the Silk Road?" Exactly, Sophia. That right there is the Silk Road, right? This super long trade route that traded the most valued items that were in the world at the time. And where is Constantinople? But right in the middle of it and right at the end. So whenever goods needed to go to Europe or when they needed to go to northern Africa or when they needed to go up here into the northern countries as well, it had to pass through Constantinople. So that's going to make Constantinople super, there we go. Okay, I'm done now. Go away. There we go. Super wealthy, super quickly, right? So go ahead and jot that down. They were in the middle of that Silk Road. So in Constantinople, you could find products from all over the entire world, right? You could find silk, tea, spices, porcelains, textiles that were coming from the Arabic kingdoms. That's what I meant to say. Textiles are cloth, by the way, for the rest of your entire existence you need to know. And all these other items that you could find in Constantinople, which made them very wildly wealthy. And as you can see, looking at their architecture, looking at their art, looking at all these other things about them, they're going to grow very, very wealthy very, very quickly. Now, they particularly grow super, super wealthy pretty soon after the fall of Western Rome, under this leader by the name of Justinian, right? So Justinian is the guy that comes along, not right after Constantine, but about 200 years after Constantine, and he brings Byzantine to almost the former height of the Western Roman Empire, right? Justinian was a phenomenally good leader, and he was a very phenomenally important person. And shout out Molly real quick, we're going to be talking about a very important woman in his life as well, right? So the big thing about it, though, is Justinian is going to rule from 526 AD to 565 AD. About 40 years worth of ruling, and he is going to bring the Byzantine Empire to its absolute heights, right? He's going to rebuild Constantinople in grand style, so it looks like the money that it possesses, right? One of the most famous actual places that he built in this empire was this place called the Hagia Sophia, which to this day is considered a very important landmark for a lot of Christians to actually go and check out. It's actually on my top 10 I got to see it before I die list, right? It is still in the city that is formerly known as Constantinople, except it's not called Constantinople anymore. It's actually called Istanbul, and some of y'all have probably heard this song that actually talks about how it's not Constantinople, it's Istanbul now.
Istanbul was Constantinople, now it's Istanbul, not Constantinople, been a long time gone. Constantinople, now it's Turkish delight on a moonlit night.
Exactly, right? So the thing about it is the Hagia Sophia was built under the reign of Justinian, and it was architecturally massive, right? Look at the top of these noggins right here, and look how large this temple is. Now, interesting little thing about it, though, is some of you are like, wait a minute, Mr. Terry, those are Arabic symbols that are actually all over the place. So is this a Christian temple, or is this a mosque? We'll get into more of that a little bit later. It's a mosque now, but it used to be a Christian temple. And actually, it was so well designed with all these giant windows up here at the top of the dome itself of the Hagia Sophia that you can see around its edge, that when the sun shines inside of it and you look straight up at it, you can't see the retaining walls on the outside. So everybody said it looked like the dome of the Hagia Sophia. It was so beautiful that it was being held up by a chain from heaven, right? So the thing about it, though, about Justinian, he is going to be the guy that is responsible for rebuilding Constantinople in this grand style, for making it like the Byzantine look like all the money that it actually had. Another big thing that he's going to do that's going to forever change society is he's going to invent this thing underneath his reign known as the Justinian Code, right? A law code that's going to be very, very important. It's going to be modeled off of the old version of Roman law, the 12 tables. But what's very important about his is it's a civil law code. Now, as we know, one bad thing about the Western Roman Empire is that laws didn't apply to everybody the exact same way. If you were a senator and you stabbed my boy Caesar to death, you didn't get charged with murder because you were a patrician, right? Now, civil law, on the other hand, what Justinian creates, is actually going to be a law that applies to everybody, regardless of their class, right? So it's very important that you understand that concept, and that this tome that he creates is going to be a unifying characteristic of his empire, and it's going to keep them together for hundreds and hundreds of years, right? So just remember, civil law, Justinian Code, very, very important. Now, speaking of Justinian, though, as well, he was an emperor or an autocrat is what you can refer to him as, right? The thing about being an emperor and autocrat means you are a sole ruler with complete authority, right? And so whatever Justinian said is what happened. He did not share his rule with other republican styles of government like other emperors that had actually came before him. But the thing about it, though, about Justinian is he had complete ownership and rule over the church. He had rule over the entire government. He had rule over the lives of everyday citizens, right? And going forward, why was he so powerful, right? Why? A lot of it has to do with the fact that Western Rome fell. And so, of course, in the absence of Western Rome, his autocratic rule is going to be successful. So people are going to keep listening to him. But the other reason is because he had a very, very close advisor. A very good advisor that told him what to do 9 times out of 10. So really, why was Justinian so powerful? It's because he was supported by a very powerful woman, right? A woman by the name of Theodora, right? His wife, who actually kept him very, very close by and was his main advisor. She was a ruthless politician, and she was Justinian's main co-counsel and advisor. She actually helped him to solve so many problems that broke out throughout the entire area, right? When a plague happened inside of the Byzantine Empire, she helped him quell it and actually keep him alive. Actually, also interesting fact about that plague, Justinian himself got the plague of Constantinople that actually broke out underneath him. It was called the plague of Justinian at the entire time. He got this sickness and didn't die because Theodora kept him safe, right? And then also as well, there was this giant revolt that broke out all over Constantinople that almost spelled the end of Justinian's rule. Justinian almost ran away during these things called the Nika riots, right? And the Nika riots were actually during this era when there were these chariot racing teams, a blue team and a green team, that revolted against the high taxes that Justinian Justinian had put on them and stuff like that, and they are going to try and take over the entire city. And Justinian looked at Theodora during these riots being like, should we run? Should we flee? Should we go back to the old Rome and try to restart? And she looked at him and said, no royal runs. I would rather die an empress than die on the run, right? And she said, you know what makes a fantastic thing to be buried in? Royal purple is a fantastic thing to be buried in, right? And that is Theodora right there, just being absolutely so tough and stuff like that, not playing around about this stuff. And she actually came up with the idea to stop the riots, right? And she was like, oh, you want to know the best thing to do to stop these riots would be? Bribe one of the teams, kill the other one. See who takes the bribe first, right? So they actually bribed the blue team and killed the rest of the green team, right? Theodora don't mess around, all right? So the big thing about it, though, as well, is that there was a very strong military underneath the reign of Justinian and Theodora that had a weapon that no one had ever seen. They had a massive army, and they also had a navy equipped with a weapon that no one else in the world had. And it was known as Greek fire, right? And this is actually what a modern representation of Greek fire looks like.
Did you know that Byzantine fireships were the top secret super weapons of their age? That a large bronze container containing the mixture was heated from below by a flame and pressurized by a pump. An outlet valve then allowed the liquid to race up and out through a nozzle, where a pilot flame ignited the fluid, bathing the target in a fire hose of flames.
Yeah, it's this really intense, like, oil-based flamethrower device that the Greeks actually used, or like, excuse me, not the Greeks, but that the Greek-speaking Byzantine Empire used against their enemies, right? And the interesting thing about it as well is that actually it doesn't get put out when you put water on it. It actually gets worse, right? So interesting little things about it, though, is that these two figures are going to bring them up to absolute power, right? But after Theodora and Justinian die, we actually believe that Justinian died from just natural causes. And we think Theodora actually in her later years got cancer and actually passed away. But problems are going to hit the Byzantine after Justinian, right? So Justinian brought them to a very, very large height. Like if we jump back right here and look at this map, he retook all of these different areas, right? And almost reestablished what the Western Roman Empire used to be, right? So looking at this gigantic swath of land that he took over, look at that red line. That's how much Justinian owned. But then after Justinian, by about 1,000 years later, give or take, it's beginning to shrink. And then by the empire, like in 1360, it's only this big. So Justinian, following his rule, the empire begins to kind of slowly shrink and get very, very small. Because they're going to get hit by a series of different problems, right? Big things including the fact that they were attacked a lot. Why would they be attacked so much? Because they were that trade hub, right? They were that wealthy place. They were the center of economic activity that was going on in Europe during this time period. They had food and resources and all these different things. So these other barbarian tribes are going to decide to try and attack these places, right? The Huns, led by Attila, are going to attack it at one point. The Slavs, the Persians, the Turks, these other group of people known as the Vikings are going to try and raid different parts of Constantinople at different points, and they're going to siege the city in massive waves of attack, right? So the thing about it, though, going forward as well, is they're also going to be weakened by a religious movement that happened underneath them, right? Now, it's a very interesting thing because today the church is much stronger because of this movement and stuff like that, but a massive event in 1053 went down known as the Great Schism, right? So the Great Schism is going to be an event that happened in the Byzantine Empire that's very important, and as they're getting weaker and stuff, this event is going to change the landscape of Christianity forever. And it's very important that you know it. And you're not only going to learn about it in my class, you're going to learn about it in Mr. Mathern's class, right? And the church in the Byzantine Empire that was the original Christian church, just the original church that was just like Christianity, one church, one thing, is going to split into two new churches, known as an Eastern church and a Western church after Justinian. And it's mostly due to the differences in worship across the empire, right? And it's what leads to these two churches being called the Roman Catholic Church, because it moved over here to what is now Rome in the modern day era, and that's why St. Peter's is located in Rome, and the Roman Catholic Church is known as the Roman Catholic Church, and the other one is known as the Eastern Orthodox Church, right? And Eastern Orthodoxy is very, very different. This right here is the Greek Orthodox Church that is actually located at the top of City Park in New Orleans, right? So we even have Orthodox churches inside of our own city, right? And the big thing about it, though, is why did they split? Some of you are like, Mr. Terry, I like what you're getting at. I like that you're telling me where Catholicism comes from, and I love that you're talking about the Eastern Orthodox Church as well. But where did these disagreements come from? Why did they split? It's a really, really That's a really, really great question there, Chapman. I like that question. That's good stuff, right? Well, the thing about it is because of bread, popes, the sun, and some images, right? So the real thing about it that you need to understand is I actually went off and commissioned a very nice guy to text me and tell me what actually went down in this. As you can see, this is Mr. Mathern right here, and I texted him and I was like, what are the disagreements that led to the East-West schism, big fella? And he told me all of this stuff right here, and we just kind of whittled it down into a few causes. Because like I said, you're going to talk about it in his class a little bit again as well, right? So going into it, though, as we all know, Mr. Mathern, just what an absolute godsend. I know. What a good guy. So the big thing about it that he told me in this text message, though, is that actually the biggest disagreements between the Eastern Orthodox and the Roman Catholics was the fact that actually, one, bread. Leavened versus unleavened, right? The Catholics believe that bread should be taken in unleavened form, or the thin pieces of the host that y'all actually have at Mass. And then also the Eastern Orthodox were like, no, leavened bread is fine, and they actually soaked it in wine, actually, before they take their Eucharist, right? Popes, the Eastern Orthodox doesn't like popes, the Roman Catholics did, right? The Son is this thing called the Filioque controversy, right? Whereas, for example, Catholics say in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Eastern Orthodoxy does not say that. And also imagery as well, because Eastern Orthodox people believe that you have to be very careful about the number of images and icons you use inside of a church, right? So big thing about it, though, is even after all these big events, after being attacked, after Justinian, after Constantine, after all that stuff, the Byzantine is going to begin to fall, right? They're going to fall towards the end of the medieval period, and their fall marks the end of the medieval period, actually. The Crusades that started in 1090 are going to dramatically weaken the Byzantine Empire, right? And we'll talk more about Crusades and stuff like that as well when we get into what's going on in medieval Europe. But that's going to leave them super, super weak, as you can tell, as the Crusades pass through Constantinople and were tried to being fought over the Holy Land down here, known as Jerusalem. It's going to leave the Byzantine Empire very, very weak. Constantinople, though, is also going to fall in 1453 AD to the hands of these people known as the Ottoman Turks, right? And they're going to be turned into what's known as the Ottoman Empire. Today, after it fell, right, the name was changed to Istanbul. So Constantinople, after it fell in 1453, was no longer called Constantinople. It's now called Istanbul, right? And it's the capital of a country known as Turkey, because it was taken over by the Ottoman Turks, right? So looking into it, though, that is the Byzantine Empire. That is the reign that was the Byzantine Empire. And when we get back to class on Monday and Tuesday, we will be talking about the Eastern Golden Age. So I'll see y'all then. Y'all have a good one.